It was late one rainy night in 1940 when Bumpy Johnson stood in the shadows of the alleyway, watching the world move around him. Harlem was his, and yet tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of the city's future pressed heavier on his shoulders than ever before. The corrupt forces of the city had started closing in, men with power, men who thought they could control Harlem without knowing its pulse. But the one man who was pulling the strings, the man who had been a thorn in Bumpy's side for years, was about to make the mistake of his life. The mayor of New York City, a crooked figure with ties to every shady business in town, had finally pushed Bumpy too far. The deals, the manipulation, the quiet oppression of Harlem's people, it all led to this moment of reckoning. Bumpy knew that the only way to protect his kingdom was to take down the man at the top, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. LaGuardia had thought he was untouchable, sitting at the helm of the city while pulling strings that hurt the very people Bumpy fought to protect. He had used his office for years to stifle Harlem's growth, to control its businesses, and to keep its people in line. But Harlem wasn't some commodity to be manipulated. Harlem was family, and Bumpy was about to show LaGuardia that you don't trifle with the people's king. The rain drizzled down, mixing with the smoke from Bumpy's cigarette. His breath was steady, his heart calm. This wasn't the first time he had taken on a powerful adversary, but this was the first time that taking down the enemy would mean more than just power. It would mean breaking the system that had been crushing his people for years. Bumpy Johnson had long since made his mark on Harlem. Born in 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina, he had come to Harlem not as a king, but as a survivor. The streets of New York, and more specifically Harlem, had hardened him into the man he was today. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was a hustler, a man who built his empire from the ground up, using his wits and his grit. By the time 1940 rolled around, Bumpy wasn't just a name, it was a symbol. Harlem was more than just a place for Bumpy, it was his kingdom. His influence stretched far beyond the criminal underworld. He controlled the drug trade, gambling rackets, and even the businesses in Harlem, but more importantly, he controlled the hearts of the people. Harlem's loyalty to Bumpy was unshakable. He protected them, looked out for them, and above all, he never allowed the system to break them. The mayor, LaGuardia, and other city officials had long viewed Harlem as a nuisance, an obstacle to their plans of gentrification and control. To them, Harlem was a place for criminals, a stain on the city's clean image. But to Bumpy, Harlem was home. He wasn't just a crime boss, he was the protector of its people. The mayor's attempts to undermine the community and take control of Harlem's resources had finally pushed Bumpy to the edge. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about respect. The mayor had crossed the line when he started using his political power to stifle Harlem's growth and oppress its people. Bumpy's legend had been built on standing up to those who tried to take what wasn't theirs, whether it was from the police, rival gangs, or corrupt officials like LaGuardia. He had survived every threat before, and now he was prepared to make the ultimate move. He wasn't going to let a man like LaGuardia sit in a position of power while abusing it to crush the very people he'd sworn to serve. For years, Bumpy had played a careful game with the city's elite. He had made alliances when it suited him and broken them when necessary. He had learned how to navigate the city's power structures, how to avoid the long arm of the law, how to neutralize rivals, and how to control his own empire. But this time, it was different. LaGuardia wasn't just a mayor with a vendetta. He was the city's most powerful man, a figure whose influence reached into every corner of New York, including Harlem. LaGuardia had used his office to impose taxes on Harlem businesses, to raid the community for illicit activities, and to bring in outside forces to try and clean up the streets. Bumpy knew that if the mayor succeeded, Harlem's soul would be crushed under the weight of outside control. His people would be displaced, their homes taken away, their livelihoods destroyed. But Bumpy also knew something else. LaGuardia was a man of pride. He was a man who thought he was untouchable, a man who believed that power was something you simply held, not something you earned. That pride would be his undoing. Bumpy's strategy was to hit him where it hurt the most, where it would make the world notice, where it would send a message not just to the mayor, but to every corrupt official who thought they could walk over Harlem without consequence. He would expose the mayor's corruption to the public and use it as leverage to strip him of his power. Bumpy's men had been working in the shadows, gathering evidence, making connections, and digging into LaGuardia's financial dealings. They had already uncovered dirt, bribery, payoffs, illegal business dealings with rival gangs, and more. All the pieces were falling into place. Bumpy knew that the time had come to act. The mayor would have to face the consequences of his actions, and Bumpy was going to be the one to bring him to justice. But there was a bigger question looming over everything. Would Bumpy be able to pull this off without putting Harlem's people at risk? The FBI was always watching, and any wrong move could bring the full force of the federal government down on Harlem. But Bumpy wasn't afraid of the feds, and he wasn't afraid of LaGuardia. He had survived worse, and now he was ready for the showdown that would change Harlem forever. Bumpy's plan was as precise as it was dangerous. He knew the stakes. He had seen corrupt men like LaGuardia rise to power, using their offices to manipulate the system, exploit the poor, and crush those who dared stand in their way. But LaGuardia was different. He wasn't just a corrupt politician. He was a symbol of the systemic oppression that had plagued Harlem for decades. If Bumpy could expose the mayor's corruption, he would not only take him down, he would show the world that Harlem wasn't a place to be ignored or trampled upon. In the days leading up to the confrontation, Bumpy's men worked tirelessly. The evidence they had gathered on LaGuardia's illicit dealings, bribes, payoffs, illegal land grabs was damning. But it wasn't enough just to have the evidence. Bumpy needed a way to make sure that when the moment came, the world would know the truth. He couldn't afford to fail. His men had done their part, but Bumpy needed to ensure the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The mayor's inner circle had to be exposed. And to do that, Bumpy had to walk a fine line. One misstep could bring the city's full wrath down on him, his men, and Harlem itself. But Bumpy wasn't one to shy away from danger. He knew that to truly protect his people, to secure his legacy, he had to act decisively. Late one night, Bumpy met with his most trusted lieutenant, Big Jim. The man was as big as his name suggested, with a commanding presence that could fill any room. Jim had been with Bumpy through thick and thin, and in these final moments, Bumpy knew he could count on him. "How close are we, Jim?" Bumpy asked, his voice low, his eyes sharp with focus. "We got everything, Bumpy," Big Jim replied, his voice as steady as ever. "The press is already sniffing around the mayor's backdoor dealings. We got a story ready to go, and the mayor's name's all over it. But we need to move fast. If we don't hit him now, he'll bury it. He's been on to us." Bumpy's expression remained unchanged. He had known the risk, and he was ready. "We hit him hard. Public, no back doors. Make sure the people know exactly who LaGuardia is and who he's been working with. We'll show them he's been using Harlem to line his pockets." Big Jim nodded. "We'll make sure every paper in this city knows his name. He won't get away this time." The moment of confrontation came in the form of a press conference, an event that LaGuardia had scheduled to reassure the city that Harlem was under control, that his policies were working. Bumpy knew this was the perfect opportunity. He'd already arranged for his men to be planted in key positions around the room, ready to leak the explosive evidence of the mayor's corruption at the right moment. As the press conference began, the usual faces filled the room. Journalists, city officials, and those who still believed in LaGuardia's rhetoric. Bumpy had arranged for one of his men, a journalist by the name of Tony "the Rat" Russo, to be positioned in the front row, ready to ask the right questions. Russo had been working for Bumpy for years, feeding him information on political figures, and tonight he would deliver the blow. LaGuardia stood behind the podium, exuding the kind of self-assuredness that had made him an untouchable figure in New York politics. His polished words were designed to convince the public that Harlem's issues were being handled, that he was their savior. But the longer he spoke, the more Bumpy's plan took shape. Russo, sitting at the front, raised his hand. The room went quiet as LaGuardia nodded at him, a dismissive smirk on his face. "Yes, Tony?" LaGuardia asked, his tone condescending. Russo stood up, adjusting his tie before speaking in a calm but deliberate voice. "Mayor LaGuardia, you've been making a lot of promises to Harlem, but what do you say to the allegations that have surfaced recently? Allegations about your involvement in land deals, illegal kickbacks from the gambling rings, and bribes from local crime syndicates?" A gasp ran through the room. LaGuardia's face tightened, but he quickly recovered, his arrogance still in full force. "I don't know where you're getting your information, but this is simply untrue. It's nothing but slander and lies. I've done everything in my power to clean up Harlem." Before LaGuardia could finish, Russo dropped the bomb. "How do you explain the documents we have, Mayor?" he asked, holding up a folder for all to see. "Documents that show your involvement in every major land grab in Harlem over the last 5 years. Documents that show you've been taking money from gambling operations run by the very people you promised to shut down. I have everything right here." The room was in chaos. The journalists buzzed with questions, shouting at LaGuardia, demanding answers. Bumpy had set it all in motion. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. LaGuardia's carefully constructed image was crumbling before the eyes of the public, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. LaGuardia's face turned beet red with fury. "This is an attack on my character," he shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. "These accusations are baseless, and I will not stand for this." But it was too late. The damage had been done. Bumpy's people had succeeded in exposing LaGuardia's corruption, and the press had already picked up the story. The mayor's name was now synonymous with dishonesty, greed, and betrayal. It wouldn't be long before the city demanded answers, and Bumpy knew that this was just the beginning. By the time the press conference ended, the damage was irreparable. The media storm that followed was swift and unforgiving. Headlines across the city screamed of LaGuardia's corruption, of his ties to criminal syndicates, and of his illegal dealings in Harlem. It didn't matter that he tried to deny everything. The people had seen the evidence, and it was undeniable. LaGuardia's once sturdy political foundation cracked, the walls of his carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble. For the first time in years, the mayor was on the defensive, and the very system that had elevated him now turned against him. His political rivals, sensing an opportunity, began to circle, ready to pick apart his administration piece by piece. But in Harlem, the fallout was different. The streets buzzed with a new sense of power. Bumpy Johnson had struck a decisive blow against the system that had oppressed the community for so long. The people of Harlem, who had long been dismissed as troublemakers and criminals, now saw that their king had not only protected them from the system, but had turned it on its head. The immediate consequences were evident. LaGuardia's political career, once a symbol of authority and respect, was now a cautionary tale. His allies in the city council began distancing themselves from him. His once loyal followers were now forced to reckon with the reality that they had supported a man who had betrayed the very people he swore to serve. But for Bumpy, the aftermath wasn't about his victory. It was about what the victory meant for Harlem. The corrupt forces that had tried to control the city and its people had been exposed. And with that exposure came a new sense of respect, not just for Bumpy, but for the entire community. As the weeks went by, Bumpy's influence grew stronger. Harlem's businesses began to thrive again, with many of the owners and entrepreneurs who had been intimidated into silence by LaGuardia's administration now turning to Bumpy for protection and guidance. Bumpy didn't just control the streets, he now controlled the pulse of Harlem's future. His victory had proved that Harlem was not some forgotten corner of New York. that its people had power, and that no politician, no matter how powerful, could erase that. The news of LaGuardia's fall spread beyond Harlem. The entire city was abuzz with the story of the gangster who had taken down the mayor. Politicians and business leaders alike watched as Bumpy's influence expanded, not just in the underworld but in the higher echelons of New York society. The mayor's collapse had opened doors for Bumpy, doors that once seemed closed to men like him. But Bumpy didn't seek power for the sake of power. He knew that this victory wasn't just about taking down LaGuardia. It was about changing the way the system worked, about creating a new order where Harlem was no longer at the mercy of corrupt politicians. His victory was a lesson to the city, and to anyone who sought to oppress Harlem. You could try to crush the people, but the people would always fight back. The fall of Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia was a turning point, not just in New York politics, but in the history of Harlem. For Bumpy Johnson, it was more than just a personal victory. It was the cementing of his legendary status. The people who had once looked up to him as a protector now saw him as something more, a symbol of defiance against a system that had long sought to crush them. Bumpy's reputation spread far beyond Harlem's borders. While the police and the mafia had always respected him, now even the city's most powerful figures began to take notice. He had taken down a sitting mayor, a man who had once been untouchable. And in doing so, Bumpy had proven that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the will of the people. In the months that followed, Bumpy solidified his position as the undisputed king of Harlem. His influence stretched into every corner of the city, from the streets to the boardrooms. Even those in the highest circles of power knew better than to challenge him directly. They had seen what happened to LaGuardia, and they understood that Bumpy's reach was not to be underestimated. But it wasn't just about power. It was about respect. Bumpy's ability to take down the most powerful man in the city had earned him the unwavering loyalty of Harlem's people. The streets were his, and anyone who dared to challenge that would have to reckon with him, and with the community he had protected for so long. As the years passed, Bumpy Johnson's name would be remembered as a legend, not just in the underworld, but in the history of New York itself. He had fought not just for his own survival, but for the survival of Harlem. And in doing so, he had proven that no one, no matter their position of power, could ever take what he had built. Harlem was his. His legacy was unshakable. The night Bumpy Johnson took down Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia would go down as one of the most significant moments in Harlem's history. It was a moment when the underdog had stood up to the most powerful political figure in the city, and not only survived, but triumphed. This wasn't just about one man's rise to power. It was about the power of a community, the strength of a people who had been pushed to the margins, yet had always found a way to survive. Bumpy Johnson's victory was a reminder that no matter how many times a system tries to break you, there's always a way to fight back. And sometimes it takes a legend to show the world that true power isn't in the hands of politicians or the wealthy, it's in the hands of the people. This wasn't just about pride, it was about justice. Bumpy Johnson had reminded the world that respect can't be bought, that power comes from loyalty, from community, and from standing up for what's right. And in that moment, Bumpy had not only secured his place as Harlem's king, but as a legend whose name would be remembered long after his time.